find a podcast about. Today we're reviewing Remarkable People with Guy Kawasaki. Thank you for hitting play. I'm your host, Timothy Chemo Bryan, and I bring my experience with podcasting since 2006 as a listener and a podcaster. I'm here to help you outsmart the algorithm and find your next binge-worthy podcast. Now here's how the show works. I comb the millions of podcasts currently available for free on various platforms, and then I come back to you with what I've found. Sure, you can use search engines for recommendations from many podcast apps, but I feel that getting a personal recommendation from a real, live, breathing person, not AI, is still the best way to find the gems that are out there. The show is broken up into 3 parts. I'm a huge fan of car talk, so bear with me. Now, the first half of the show is the stats of the show being reviewed. That gives you all the details about where to find the show, how many episodes, who's hosting the show. Basically, that part of the show is just for the stats. The second half of the show, I dig deeper into the show and letting you know how well the hosts interact, talk about their audio quality, and let you know what I think the show is about. The last half of the show is where I talk about why the show is binge-worthy, where to start your journey with that show being reviewed, and I'll be reaching out to the hosts to see if they'd like to discuss their show and talk about their podcast journey. Let's get going. In this episode, I'll be talking about Guy Kawasaki's Remarkable People podcast. Now, this is a very positive podcast, and let me start off by saying that when I need a pick-me-up, I dive into any episode and feel better about myself. So let's go ahead and get to those stats. Your host is Guy Kawasaki, and you can find his website at guykawasaki.com, where you also find this podcast. Now, at the time of the recording, he has over 200 episodes that run about 60 minutes an episode. His first episode was on October 19th, 2019, so he started just before the pandemic hit all of us. His show is described as Guy Kawasaki is on a mission to make you remarkable. His Remarkable People podcast features interviews with remarkable people such as Jane Goodall, Mark Beninoff, Waz, Christy Yagamuchi. Every episode will make you more remarkable. Now, the genre here is marketing business news. And don't let that dissuade you because the people he talks to are often not in the marketing world. The format is episodic, so you can start anywhere. And he has, on occasion, interviewed some people 2 or 3 times. Now, there's a Facebook account, Twitter account that goes with the podcast, although that's mainly at Guy's thoughts and work versus solely on the podcast. Now, I have included Podchaser, Listen Notes, and Good Pods links. Listen Notes rates this podcast in the top 0.05%, but take that with a grain of salt because, as you know, Listen Notes only counts the plays on their platform. Good Pods rates this as number 1 in the top 100 Apple all-time chart, number 1 in the top 100 Apple monthly chart, number 11 in the top 100 entrepreneurship all-time chart, number 13 in the top 100 technology all-time chart, and number 14 in the top 100 technology monthly chart. And these rankings are based on Apple Podcast reports. Peanut butter. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? Well, actually, it is if you're talking about Sprelly peanut butter and jellies. Oh, yeah, that's right. They do their own jellies to pair with their peanut butter. And folks, it just isn't for sandwiches anymore. In fact, my family used Sprelly to make birthday cake fillings for my twins, and it was delicious. Sprelly produces a line of gourmet nut peanut spreads and jellies. And each Sprelly spread and Sprelly jelly can mix and match in various ways, creating exponential options that elevate your PB&J experience. All you got to do is choose your spread and choose your jelly. But wait! Each individual Sprelly can also be used in a variety of delicious things. Include Sprelly as an ingredient in baking cookies or as an added boost for your smoothie. Try creating a glaze, dressing, or marinade for some of your favorite grilled dishes or salads. Or just eat Sprelly out of the jar as a snack like I do. Where can you get your next fantastic peanut butter and jelly? Go to Sprelly.com if you're outside of the Fredericksburg area. But if you're in Fredericksburg, Virginia, go right to their store at 1501 Princess Anne Street, Fredericksburg, Virginia. Put some Sprelly in your belly. Now, my kid's favorite is Winter Wonderland, but it's only here for a short time, and if you don't get it, you gotta wait. So get some Sprelly in that belly while you listen to Find a Podcast About. All right, another episode and another interview-based podcast. This one is from Guy Kawasaki, who has a great track record for being at the forefront of technology and marketing. Now, I'm not sure where I found this podcast, but it's one that I truly enjoy enough to bring it to you and knowing that you're going to enjoy it and, put it in your rotation. So let's get started. So Guy is fairly famous in his niche, which is technology and marketing. And being such a celebrity means that you get a team behind you to produce your podcast. Now, as you would expect, this podcast is professionally produced and sounds great. I'm not an audio snob, but I have turned off podcasts for coughing that has not been removed, difficult to understand audio, or sounds in the background that are distracting. You're not going to have that problem with this podcast. Yes, he has a professional staff. I do not. In fact, I'm not trained in audio engineering professionally. However, I can still get good sound from my basement man cave office. I look at my quality as a base level for all podcasts I review, and if they can match it or be better than my show, then they're good to go. Guy's show does this remarkably well. See what I did there? Remarkably well? Ha! Anyhow, you will be able to listen to this in the car, while mowing the lawn, cleaning the house, but probably not watching the kids because you're going to be engrossed in this content and want to take notes. Let's talk about the interaction between Guy and his guest. His first and repeated guest, Jane Goodall, starts their second episode by greeting Guy as a chimpanzee would in this clip.
My wonderful welcome comes to you from the forests and hills of Gombe National Park in Tanzania. The sound that you would hear if you came, some of you have been, but if you go to Gombe and climb the hills in the morning, the sound of a chimpanzee greeting the day, announcing, here I am, who's out there? Hello. Bring another language into your clubhouse.
In this episode, it was done via Clubhouse, and the audio quality wasn't 100%, but it was still pretty good. In fact, it was better than typical Clubhouse audio. Folks, it helps to have a professional audio engineering staff behind you. Here's how the episode happened with Jane.
This episode of Remarkable People is particularly remarkable because it was unplanned. On April 14th, 2021, I did a fireside chat with Jane Goodall on a social audio platform. It turned out so good that we decided to make it into a podcast. Jane and I were both on phones as opposed to using our usual Squadcast podcasting recording platform. So the audio is not quite what you've come to expect from this podcast, but it's all about Jane.
Now, keep in mind that this show started right before the pandemic, and we're all trying different techniques to maintain contact with each other across the world. And Clubhouse was a way to do that. In 2023, Clubhouse isn't as important as it once was. And you can hear the closeness that Jane and Guy have naturally. Take a look at the show art, where Jane is picking through Guy's hair. That, my friends, is closeness. I like you, but please don't touch my head when you see me in public. I like my fleas right where they are. Now, Guy treats all of his guests in a similar manner and develops a closeness with them. In fact, in a recent interview I listened to while driving back from a podcast conference in New Jersey called Indie PodCon 8, Guy was talking with Jonathan Connors. And during the research phase, he talked with Jonathan's teacher in high school that had quite an influence on Jonathan. Here's the clip for that.
Now we are cutting to a recording of a phone conversation that I had with Deco. And I expected this to be a 5-10 minute conversation about Jonathan, but we got deeper and deeper. So I hope you enjoy what I intended to become a gray bar actually became an interview in and of itself. Here's Deco.
Guy doesn't just take what the interview delivers. It's the work behind the scenes that we don't usually get to hear. I'm glad I got to hear this one, really. It really adds to the authenticity of the encounter and the interview. The next aspect I'd like to talk about is the intro and welcoming newcomers. Now, Guy doesn't necessarily do that, but the approach he takes gives a brief bio of the guest and fulfills the need to stating why the person is remarkable. Hence the title of the podcast. Now, here's a clip from his interview with Gary V, or Gary Vaynerchuk, and let's take a listen to that.
I'm on a mission to make you remarkable. Helping me today is Gary Vaynerchuk, aka Gary V. He is back for another remarkable episode to share all the golden nuggets from his book, 12 and a Half, leveraging the emotional ingredients necessary for business success. Gary is an entrepreneur, social media influencer, speaker, and author. He's also an early investor in companies such as Canva, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Venmo, Snapchat, Coinbase, and Uber. Gary is a 5-time New York Times best-selling author and a highly sought-after public speaker. His other books include Crush It, Jab, 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 Right Hook, and The Thank You Economy. In this episode, he discusses kind candor, empathy, what you should look for in your first job, whether you should weaken weaknesses or strengthen strengths, that's the tongue twister, and why NFTs are the next big thing. I'm Guy Kawasaki. This is Remarkable People. And now here's the one and only truly unique Gary V.
Now, with this simple format, it reminds me of the great Paul Harvey with his The Rest of the Story on radio. You'd get to the end thinking you knew who the person was, and then you'd get surprised. Or if you didn't know the person, then you're surprised that you actually do know them. Guy does this to some extent. However, you will always know who the guest is by the episode title. And that's usually why I tune in, so I can hear my favorite person has to say. Now, this is where podcasting may be a little bit weaker in radio, is that you don't always know what you're getting into with a radio program, whereas a podcast is a very voluntary thing, and you can pick and choose exactly what you're interested in. For me, I just set my podcast app to notify me of new episodes, and then I listen to them as I have time. With Guy's show, this is a throwback to Paul Harvey, in my opinion. Now, I haven't asked Guy directly about this, but it would be a good question to pose. Anyhow, I really like the bio read like this instead of what someone does, other people do, or if the host says, tell me about yourself. I hate that, and the host should tell their listeners why this person is on the show at this time, and why they should listen. It's a pet peeve of mine. So, if you're a new listener, Guy isn't going to give you the overall run of the show, of how the show works, but after an episode or two, you'll really see how he manages his show. The last thing I want to talk about is the overall feeling of the show. Now, many of the episodes, I learned something new about a person that I follow. And every interview is entertaining, and sometimes I feel like a voyeur on the conversation, which, for me, is the epitome of great podcasting. Let's listen to Gary V's interview where they talk about kindness and candor.
Let's do a semi-deep dive into the concept of kind candor, because those two words are not usually, I won't say they're oxymoronic, but they're not usually next to each other. So what do you mean by kind candor?
You just made my day. Let me tell you why. No, I mean this. I'll tell you why.
Must be a boring day.
No, sir. You did something very nice there that I'm really excited about this. I can, without a shadow of doubt, tell everybody publicly now, it's not fun, but that by far the biggest weakness of my professional career was candor. I demonized it. My father was very good at it, but he delivered it with such poison that I watched all the detrimental effects of candor. He said, I'm shooting it straight. The problem was it was shot out of a gun of, making people upset. And a lot of people miss the point of candor. The fact that you just said oxymoron, not together, and I really respect and value your opinion, lands with me. And here's why. I don't think people realize how candor was delivered over the last 50 years in business. I believe so many people use the excuse of candor to not be kind. I really believe that.
Gary Vee has a certain reputation for candor, and his language sometimes is repelling to people. But he's just trying to get his ideas out there for the public and help those who listen to him. Now let's look at another interview with Jonathan Conyers, where he discusses something very personal to him.
I remember being at Stony Brook University, a professor telling me to hold my breath. And I held my breath and I couldn't breathe anymore. And he was like, stop. And he was like, what did you think about when you couldn't breathe? And I was like, nothing. He was like, that is the essence of respiratory therapy. It's the idea that when you can't breathe, you can't think about nothing else. So doctors, nurses, nobody can do their job unless we allow our patients to breathe. So one breath at a time.
And you got to save your mother's life, right?
Yeah, that was a tough experience for me. I've never actually even shared that ever publicly. The people who haven't got the book yet. Yeah, to be able to use my expertise and knowledge to help give her CPR and revive her when she was going through that difficult situation was tough and mentally draining, but it was also a remarkable experience as I think about it, to even have the tools necessary to help her in that difficult situation.
Now, in that clip, we hear Jonathan talking about his helping his mother to breathe. Just take that in. Breathing is an automatic function, but when we can't breathe, there's nothing else more important in our lives than taking that next breath. Guy doesn't try gotcha moments, nor does he play with, people's emotions. He just has a knack of getting deep into the person he is interviewing. If you like what you heard so far, then I'd ask you to reach out. You can email me directly, timothy@findapodcastabout.xyz, or you can leave me a voicemail at the website, which is findapodcastabout.xyz. I want to help you find your next binge-worthy podcast. And if you want to have me find you a podcast in any category that you're interested in, let me know. If you're a podcaster and feel that your podcast would be served by appearing on this show, I want to talk to you too. Use the same methods of reaching out. I'm on Twitter at Find a Podcast, Instagram and Facebook at Find a Podcast About. Another thing I'd like to ask is if you found value in this podcast, pass it along to a friend. And lastly, doing this podcast is a labor of love. But love ain't cheap. So consider donating to my Buy Me a Coffee fund right there on the website. Or go to buymeacoffee.com/findapodcastabout. Each episode takes about 5 to 7 hours of research and about 2 to 3 hours of production time. That's 10 hours for each episode, and that, my friends, is a lot of coffee. Like I said earlier, the best recommendation comes from a real person. So let me help you outsmart that algorithm. Okay, so here's the part of the show where I turn you from a listener of Find a Podcast About to a binger of remarkable people with Guy Kawasaki. There are a number of celebrity interview shows out there by celebrities who are interviewing their friends. And there are shows from nobodies like me interviewing celebrities, and there are nobodies interviewing other nobodies. Now, if you like interview shows that go deep and don't ask softball questions, then Remarkable People with Guy is the show you have been looking for. Each episode is formatted with a brief mystery bio, and then they jump into the interview. And at the end, there's some final thoughts about the interview. Now, Guy has a great team making him and his guests sound fantastic, but also the questions are really good, never sensational. But some questions do get at the soul of a person. Sometimes he does surprise us with the questions he asks and whom he asked them to, as we heard with Jonathan Convery's interview. So where should you start your journey with Guy? Well, you can go through and see if he's interviewed anybody you already know. And you'll be surprised that Guy asks questions that other interviewers don't. My personal favorite is the Seth Godin interview. Take a listen.
And this leads us to the Seth concept of smallest viable market.
Right. So smallest viable audience is a big idea that I slipped into my This Is Marketing book. And I think we're not talking about it enough. What we were trained to do, you and I and others, is what's the biggest possible market? We spent all this time building this database or this piece of hardware or whatever. Go get the largest number of people. And what I'm saying to almost every business, including giant ones, is, can you tell me who the smallest viable audience is? Which are the people, the smallest group you can possibly live with, who this is perfect for, who will be overwhelmed when they hear about it, who will wait in line in the rain to buy one? And if you can't tell me who's in your smallest viable audience, why do you think you deserve a bigger one? And if you have a smallest viable audience, then just whisper to them.
In this clip, you hear about Seth's smallest viable audience, which I absolutely love and I promote. Also, listen to this clip.
So you literally don't try to support and grow your community other than the fact that you write good stuff?
That's part of the discipline. It makes me really uncomfortable to be the prize or to show up in real time. And because I'm not a guru, I just make all this stuff up. But what I learned what I learned from Alan and Bill at Fast Company, Alan's now the mayor of Santa Fe. And people in Santa Fe will be there after he's the mayor. And he was the mayor of Fast Company. But the people who believe in the Fast Company ethos are still there long after he's gone. And the goal for me has never been to be recognized or to have people want me to whisper some magic incantation to them. Not interested. I am super lucky that there are people who have given me permission to whisper to them, but then they go talk to each other and I'm not part of it, which is great.
Now, Seth doesn't really do social media that much, and he tells us why in that clip. I'm not at the point yet in my journey through life, but that is a way for somebody, for something to achieve in your life. Now, if you want a great interview with people who are doing remarkable things instead of destroying the very fabric of our world, this is the show you need to listen to. Give it a shot and tell me what your favorite episode is with Guy by emailing me, timothy@findapodcastabout.xyz. So that's the episode. I want to thank you again for taking a listen. And if you want to outsmart the algorithm or have me review a podcast, email me at timothy@findapodcastabout.xyz or go to the website, findapodcastabout.xyz, where you can listen to all the other episodes and leave me a voicemail. I'm here to help you find your next binge-worthy podcast. And I want to thank you for listening to Find a Podcast About, which is a production of TKB Studios. At TKB Studios, we believe by leading without the noise and being quiet professionals. Listen to our other podcasts, such as Create Art Podcast, where I help you tame your inner critic and create more than you consume. You can find that one at createartpodcast.com. And we have a new show out. It's a little bit, sketchy. It's called Cannabis Stories. And that's where I use AI to tell the stories of folks who have experimented with the Lord's lettuce and share the oft-times funny times that happen. You can get that one at cannabisstories.podbean.com. I'll talk with you next time. And thank you for listening.